Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a very special Friday edition of the Weekly Pitch. I'm Keat, coming to you from Vermont. The coronavirus pandemic has really shaken the sports world, especially the NCAA. On March 17th, 2020, the NCAA announced it would suspend all spring and winter competition due to COVID-19. As a result, at least 30 Division I programs have been cut already, and approximately 149 NCAA, NAIA, NJCAA, CCCAA programs have been axed to reduce athletic costs. The programs that are predominantly at risk are the non-revenue Olympic sports, especially men's programs. Personally, being a former student athlete in a non-revenue sport, it breaks my heart to witness the collapse of all these programs. How will this affect institutions? And most of all, how will this impact student athletes? I want to welcome you to my panel for this week. We have Matt Price and Gabby Hurlbut. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Glad to have you hosting for a change. How does it feel?
It's very exciting. I was so excited to host this show because obviously this topic is very close to my heart, having been a former student athlete as a rower at Ithaca College. And when I was looking through the list of teams that have been cut already so far, it's really heartbreaking to witness, especially because it impacts not only the student athletes, but the entire athletic community as a whole. And not only that, but a lot of students were told that they were going home for the entire semester, but then now that they're home and away from their teams, many of them are learning that their program has been shut down entirely.
It's very, very unfortunate. You know, I remember an article that I read this week, Sierra, and it's really amazing how the article began. You go to Akron University in Akron, Ohio, and there was this competitor from the men's cross country team. His name was Clayton Murphy, and he had apparently won a gold medal. Well, I don't know about a gold medal, but he won a medal during the last Summer Olympics. And Akron's cross-country program was the program that helped set him up for that opportunity and for him to win that medal. And now 4 years since he won that medal in 2016, now all of a sudden, the program has been axed. It's gone. Who knows if it's going to come back or when it's going to come back. So these are the times that we're living in. And just reading that off, just right off the bat at the top of the article, it just broke my heart that it happened. And I feel so bad for not just the alumni who are affected, but especially the students who now have to go to square one and figure out what in the world are they supposed to do. It's unbelievable. It's mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. Gabby, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's definitely a very unfortunate situation. And the saddest part about it is that once the whole coronavirus pandemic kind of started, nobody exactly knew what it was going to entail, how serious it was, how intense it was going to be, how long we were going to have to be in quarantine, how long the economy was going to be really shut down. So there were a lot of questions that were being posed. And so I think because of that, colleges didn't really have the opportunity to prepare for something like that financially. So I think that when the economy in general took a huge hit, then I think sports programs took an even bigger hit, because obviously if colleges generate a lot of revenue from sports, and so if they can't play sports, like a lot of the spring sports that couldn't happen at all and winter sports that got cut off, I think that it ended up ultimately being a decision where they were like, okay, so I guess we have to look into cutting sports that make less revenue in general, because you're not going to cut a sport like football or something like that usually drives more traffic and more revenue, or I probably would put basketball in that category as well. So I know even UConn, which is right up the road from my hometown, they had to cut some sports as well. And it's unfortunate when it's a Division I school like that generates a lot of revenue from sports, because those athletes are really going to be hurting and the school's going to be hurting. It's tennis that got cut. women's crew, I believe, is getting cut, and a couple other sports that they feel are not as, just don't generate as much revenue for the school. And so my main concern, I think what I would say is, what are the athletes going to do now? Are the schools going to still fulfill the rest of their scholarship that they were on, if they were on a scholarship to play their sport? And even if they weren't on a scholarship for their sport, but they got academic scholarships through the school because of that sport, would the school still give them those scholarships for the rest of their college career? And I feel like in a way they have to, but at the same time, can they afford to? Because colleges, I think, are going to lose applicants and just lose enrollment after coronavirus, because if schools go back to being online, there's going to be a lot of students, I think, that aren't going to want to do the online at that type of school and would go to a cheaper school, like maybe a community college, if they have to take online classes anyway. So can the school afford to still keep up with all of those scholarships that they're granting kids? And I think that's my main concern with college kids that went to a certain school for a sport, and also even the kids that picked the school because of their sport. And if they don't have that sport anymore, do they really have a reason for going to that school if that's the only reason they were there? So it's really sad for a lot of different reasons, and I think it still poses more questions for me in terms of, in the future, how this is going to be handled from an athlete's perspective and also from the school's perspective.
Exactly. As you were highlighting before, sports teams can, even in non-revenue sports, can be a huge factor for student enrollment. There's scholarships on the line, and even if there aren't scholarships, there are usually walk-ons, or in the case of Division III athletes who would still choose to attend that school because that program is there. If you cut that program, then those students will likely try to find somewhere else to go if they can. Another question I feel as though this pandemic imposes is, there have been a lot of problems with the NCAA's revenue structure. Its main source of profit is on men's basketball, specifically with March Madness, and second to that is Division I football, specifically Pro Bowl programs. Now, because most of their sports are non-revenue, with March Madness getting canceled this year, that has seriously created a huge problem that I believe will likely backset the NCAA for many years to come. What are your thoughts on this?
I think you make a very, very valid point there. And here's my take on it. You're absolutely right when it comes to March Madness. With March Madness getting canceled, the College World Series getting canceled, as well as other championship events, you talk about a major, major economic downturn. I mean, it's terrible. The United States, this country itself, basically part of its survival in terms of economics is on college sports. It even says it in this article from Sports Illustrated. The article is called "A Collegiate Model in Crisis, The Crippling Impact of Schools Cutting Sports." It's the article I just mentioned on the Clayton Murphy story. And there's one paragraph here that I thought was really fascinating in terms of the economics of this. According to the article, many programs are projecting at least a 20% reduction in revenue from various sources: cuts in state and federal funding, decrease in institutional support, loss in ticket sales, a drop in donations. You talk about thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, especially at the D1 level, that are lost for these college programs. And when you think about it, you have to ask yourself, how in the world are not just the programs going to recover from this, but how is the NCAA as a whole going to recover from this? Because, you know, whether it's D1 or any class of D1 or Division II or even Division III or even the independent schools, you just, like, my God, it's how are they going to come out positively from this. It's going to take it's not going to take 1 year. It's not going to take 2 years. It's not going to take 5 years. It could take longer than that. This is how bad this is. And we're not even a whole year into this problem.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point there. And that's exactly the point I was going to bring up actually, was about how are schools going to recover from this, and athletic departments going to recover from this. And the question then becomes, the sports that they had to cut, do we see those sports eventually coming back, or do we not? Because the sports that they did cut already were the sports that generally, at least from the article I was reading the other day about D1 schools in particular, it was sports that were just generating less revenue in general because they couldn't afford to keep those sports. So my question then becomes, in the future, do you try to bring back those sports to attract more enrollment? Because if you eliminate a sport, I'll use tennis as an example because that's one of the sports that was cut at a few different schools. That already takes away enrollment from people that are trying to go to a school because of tennis in particular. So if your school doesn't have that sport offered anymore permanently, then you're already losing the chances of the enrollments going up because of that specific sport. So what I want to know is, after coronavirus has passed, which again, who knows when even that'll be, when there's even going to be a vaccine, and when we're going to get to a point where we're feeling more comfortable with this whole situation. When we do get to that point though, what are the moves that the NCAA and specific athletic departments are going to make to recover from this and try to get their sports departments stable again? And is it going to be more of an NCAA decision that they're overseeing what every school does, or would they leave it to schools individually? And I'm opting more for the latter, in terms of the fact that different schools have different calibers of sports. So D1, D2, D3. So the amount of money that's driven from sports is different based on what type of school it is and what type of athletics they have. So you can't really have the NCAA make a general ruling on how schools should go about this. I think it should be based on what those specific schools' financial situations are when we're looking back in a few years down the road, after hopefully there's a vaccine and people are healthily living with coronavirus being in existence, and just kind of seeing what they can do to try to regain stability when it comes to the athletics. And I think it's really, really unfortunate to see, because there's so many kids out there, even high schoolers now. Imagine high schoolers that just got recruited to go play a sport somewhere, and they were really looking forward to going, and now all of a sudden they, first of all, even like seniors in high school, first of all, had to miss out on a graduation and all of their senior events. And even if they were a spring sport like track, and they missed out on their season, and then now to find out that their same sport that they were in, I just threw out track as an example, that same sport is cut at the school that they want to go to. How motivated or excited do you think they're really going to be to start college at this point? So it's a really, really sad situation. And I think that obviously the athletic departments were backed into a corner at this point because they didn't really have another choice. But I would just be curious to see if down the road they implement a plan where they could eventually bring those sports back. And I hope that they do.
You know, if I could piggyback on that very quickly, because you just made a very good point. I think one of the key college groups that are definitely going to be affected by this big time are those entering their freshman year. You just talked about the high school seniors. You think about, they weren't able to have their senior season. Let's say that the college that they were going to go to, or at least colleges they were interested in that do have their program, did have their program, but they weren't able to have their senior season in high school. What are they supposed to do? Because, you know, they're hunting for scholarships. They want to show off their talent even when they weren't able to show it in high school. The other thing you got to think about is, let's say you didn't have your senior season, take baseball, for example, or softball, or any other spring sports that you have in high school, like lacrosse, and you have a school that did cut their program. Well, not only did you not have it in high school, you're not able to have it in college. So you're down to, you got to go to a plan B. And the worst part about it is, even if you're going to survive through athletics, if that was your plan in the first place, what are you going to do? And right now, I feel so bad for those kids. I have no idea what the heck they're going to do.
Yeah,
These are the times that we're living in, people. These are the times.
Even if you, I also feel for people that were going into their senior year of college that were really looking forward to their last season in that sport. And it's like, what if you were like at a point where you were maybe trying to go pro after that in a sport that is being cut, or you are going to have a senior season that you were hoping would be your best season yet, and you were looking forward to breaking all of your personal records from before. And I know sports like tennis and track, athletes get really interested in breaking their personal records the next year. So what if you're one of those athletes and you were really looking forward to your last season with your team, and then you find out that your sport gets cut for your senior year? I don't know how those athletes would feel, but if it were me and my sport was what was defining my college experience and making it what it was, I don't know how interested or excited I'd feel about going back to school even for the fall semester. And I know that it's not the college's fault, so we can't really place blame on the schools for this, because it's nobody's fault at the end of the day that the economy ended up like this, because it just is what it is with COVID. But it's just a really, really unfortunate situation, and I hope that the schools can find a way to still be able to honor their athletes that were there for these sports and were giving, or even especially kids that were in the middle of their college career still and had given so much to their sport and so much of their time and dedication with the practices and the competitions and just committing so much of their life to it. I hope that colleges can still find a way to recognize those athletes, even if they don't have that sport in the coming year.
One more thing I just want to add before you take it, Sierra, is that, the executive director of the American Volleyball Coaches Association put it quite plain in this article, where she says, there's nothing worse you can ever have to do than cut sports. And the other thing you got to think about is take those kids that are on athletic scholarships. They have athletic scholarships, whether it's a full ride or they at least earn some money. But let's say that particular program is cut. Well, then do you have to give the money back? That's another thing that you got to think about here. This is a major catastrophe when you think about it.
Exactly. And it's a catastrophe that impacts not only the student athletes and not only the universities, but also the coaching staff and the facilities staff. Because when you're on a team like that, yes, you have your coaches, and it's a whole team and a whole community that supports you. You have the people that maintain your equipment and facilities. You also have those who work with travel and managing that for your team. You also have even academic advisors on campus who are there specifically to oversight specific teams. And so it's a whole system that crumbles, and it's a really devastating domino effect that would happen. So one thing that I noticed in the article that we all read was there are certain universities that are they're having coaches and athletic faculty take pay cuts to reduce spending. That way they can keep certain athletic programs. What are your thoughts on this method?
I think that that's actually not a bad idea. And I'll honestly, I've kind of hated the idea of pay cuts when this whole thing came about, because even in professional sports, there was a lot going around about people expecting to take pay cuts for this, or even just in general companies, there's people that are having to take pay cuts. But I think that in terms of this situation, it might actually be beneficial, because there's so many people, like you said, that are affected. It's like, if you're a coach of a team and that sport gets canceled, then what do you do? What do you do after that? Like, you don't have a job anymore. Like, you can try to find another school that can give you a job, but at that point, it's like, are they really looking for people to fill spots for sports teams, because the sports are already in question as it is? And so I think that at this point, people need to try to just think of it as a community aspect when it comes to a college and try to help each other out as best as they can. And it's unfortunate because we never really thought that our country was going to get to the point that it's at right now financially. But I think that because of this whole situation with the virus and how we still have so many questions that are unanswered surrounding it, I think that it's more about, at this point, kind of being a support system for each other and helping each other out. And it's like, sure, maybe people need to take a pay cut temporarily, but it's obviously doesn't need to be a permanent thing. It's just kind of, I think, till the school can get back on its feet and help the athletic programs to get back to what they were, because we do know that the athletic departments do generate a lot of revenue for the school. So I think that if people are willing to take a pay cut for, I don't want to put a timeline on it because I don't know how long this is going to last, but I think temporarily, if you have a lot of other faculty members at the school take not a huge pay cut, but like a small cut in their pay, or enough people that are willing to do it, I think it would make a lot bigger of a difference and a lot bigger of an impact on this whole situation than I think that they would even realize at the time. And I think it's a conversation that they need to have individually with everybody to detail exactly what their pay cut would be, and they need to set a timeline for when their pay can go back to being normal again. But I think at that point it kind of becomes about what would you do for your fellow staff members at that school, or like what would you do to be able to help out other areas of the school that don't affect you directly. And I think that's a big thing. And I think that colleges are always about enforcing that community feel, not just with students, but with faculty also. And so I think that if you are a faculty member that isn't directly impacted by athletics, you might be less inclined to do it. But I think it's about kind of being able to help everybody out and help the school to get back to where it was, to be able to grow into as successful as it was before coronavirus happened. So I think I would agree with that sentiment when they say that they would want people to take pay cuts. I don't see a reason why I'd be against that.
Mm. Yes. And also in other news in the NCAA, I have seen articles reporting that universities like Ohio State have begun having voluntary football practices, but are asking their student athletes to sign a waiver that acknowledges the risk of them playing with the coronavirus. Personally, I find this decision questionable because you're asking students to essentially put their health and potentially the lives of not only themselves, but also their family members and peers in the athletic community at risk to maintain that profit for the university. What are your thoughts?
I'll tell you what, that kind of decision really it is questionable, but at the same time, it also, I think, pisses me off. And I have a good reason why. And I don't mean to bring politics into this, but this is a very important comparison. You think about on June 20th, so tomorrow to be exact, you have President Trump's rally in Oklahoma. Everyone's supposed to sign a waiver. Everyone's supposed to go to that, is signing a waiver, basically saying that you are not going to hold Trump and his campaign accountable if they were to be exposed and get sick to COVID-19. So my question to Ohio State is if these football players are signing this waiver, does it say on that waiver that if they do get sick, you're not going to hold Ohio State accountable? Because, I mean, this is a very big ask. This is a very big ask, and it's a very risky one, especially in the times that we're living in right now. And even though you have a little over half of the states that are currently on a steady decline when it comes to this health crisis and in terms of the coronavirus cases, at the same time, you have at least 21 states that are seeing an uptick. Now, right now, I don't believe Ohio is one of those states, but it could. But right now, we could have a second wave of this thing in the fall, going into the winter. So this is this is very serious. And personally, I'm not a big fan of it. I understand you want things to get back to more normal. All three of us on this panel, every single person in this country wants to get back to normal, especially when it comes to sports, collegiate, professional, you name it. But right now we got to take things step by step. You want to provide the players the tests? Great. It's important that everyone gets tested either every day or every week, whatever the case may be. But at the same time, signing a waiver, saying, okay, you're taking this big of a risk. I think the players right now, and especially the coaches and the athletic directors, since we're talking about the college sports, what they need to think about right now is 4 words. Is it worth it? And right now, I'm not sure it's worth it. Even though, yes, we're only in June. All right, college football season, when you think about it, doesn't really start until September, almost around the same time as the NFL season. But right now, I think they got to think about this very, very carefully, because if players sign these waivers, they do have these practices, and then all of a sudden you start getting into the real deal. Right now, that's a very, very big risk, and I'm not sure if personally, it would be a risk that I wouldn't be willing to take. I mean, Gabby, would you say the same thing?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And the other factor is that they're not getting paid for this. It's not like they're professional athletes that are getting paid to play their sport. And even with professional athletes, it's still asking a lot of them to be like, oh, you're willing to risk getting sick to play, but it's more for the college's benefit, and they're not really thinking about the overall well-being of the athletes, and that's the part that really angers me. Like, if I were a parent and I found this out, and my kid was up on a college sports team like that, like an Ohio State football player or something like that, I'd be very angry with the system, I think, because I would say you're not taking their health and well-being into consideration with this at all. It's just about you trying to make as much money as possible right now, which, granted, the schools do need the money right now. They are struggling, but it's a lot to ask of like an 18, 19-year-old to sign a waiver, basically to agree to just do it. And then if you get sick, then like your whole team could get sick. And then where would they really be at that point anyway? Because at that point, it just looks worse for the school, first of all, because people would know that they ultimately kind of forced their athletes to do this at the end of the day. And then second of all, if everybody gets sick, then they can't play the rest of the season anyway, because that the policy would, if they all got sick, other teams wouldn't want to be playing that team for the rest of the year anyway.
Of course not.
So then it's just like, what do you think is more of a risky move, or what do you think is more worth it at that point? Because we honestly don't know, like you said, what the fall is going to bring when it comes to this virus. And I don't really think it's okay to be putting athletes in that position, because they really feel like they're backed into a corner too, because they're like, well, this is my team. Like, these are the expectations. Like, I'm on scholarship to play here. I can't just say no. So they're not really giving the kids an option either. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what's not sitting well for me, is because, like, at the end of the day, this could cause a kind of a big outrage, I think, for a lot of people. If you were to have not even just the players, but also you're looking at the coaching staff or anybody else involved with the team that could potentially get sick if there were another wave of this that's to come. And so then who does it look for at that point? Because who does it look worse for at that point? Because you'd have a lot of parents, I think, that are enraged with the whole situation. And I think just the general public would be like, to the school, like, what the heck? Like, this was your doing. You brought this on. You knew that this was a risk, but you're doing it anyway. I don't think that's the decision that I would make if I were in power when it comes to that specific school. And granted, it might be a hard decision to make in some ways, because they're trying to make the money as best as they can. And especially if you're a big Division I school like that, athletics are a big percentage of where their money comes from. But it's still, I'm never going to be okay with expecting athletes to sign a waiver that they're okay risking their lives. And not only that, just with the circumstances of coronavirus and the fact that people who are already medically compromised can get the virus and have it be a lot more dangerous for them. And what happens if one of the athletes gets the disease and ends up in a lot worse condition than other people that would get it because of,
you got to shut down the program again
or anything like that. So then then all the backlash that's going to come with that for the school, I don't like the idea of it. I really don't.
I don't like it either. I don't like it either. And the other thing you got to think about is, you're right, Gabby, the schools do need the money. We can all agree on that. These schools need the money right now when it comes to what the times that we're living in. But at the same time, you got to ask yourself this question. Do you want to make just the money, or do you want to make the money while everyone stays healthy? That's the most important thing everyone needs to think about. And the other thing I want to think about is, when it comes to this waiver. Now, look, I didn't read this waiver that the Ohio State players were handed out. But if these waivers do say something that says, let's say, you do not hold the school accountable, you're basically telling these players, you know what you're signing up for. Mm-hmm. And you don't want them to be put in that position. And the other thing you got to think about is, these students, these student athletes, these parents who are bringing their kids to college, they are telling the schools, we trust you to take care of our students. If these kids get sick, if these student athletes get sick, and the school cannot be held accountable because of these waivers, then at the same time, it's a breach of trust. That is a breach of trust, and that is a very risky situation. And that could be also, when you think about it in terms of money, a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Yeah, it's kind of like the school expecting the athletes to bail them out, essentially, by signing a waiver. Like, if something were to happen, like, oh, they know that they were signing up for this, like, they agreed to it, it's not our fault, it's not our problem, like, they didn't have to sign the waiver. So in a way, it's like the school trying to find a way to get out of being the ones that are to blame if something does happen, which is ridiculous, because that the school would get blamed regardless. So it's kind of like, you're trying to get these kids to agree to something that at the end of the day, people still would look at you as the ones to blame anyway, because you forced them to sign this. That's what I don't understand either. And it's like, yeah, maybe playing is the best solution for you personally, because you think that that's the best way that you can make money and try to balance out your school's financial situation better than you were. But at the end of the day, wouldn't you rather people stay healthy and safe? But I think if they really wanted to, maybe colleges consider something similar to what baseball was considering at some point, where they play at a neutral site and they ease the travel. But then you have to consider their classes too, that I guess they'd have to just take online classes the whole semester and be tutored, which they are, especially the D1 athletes who are gone a lot for their sports and everything like that. But I don't see a feasible way that they could actually play the season at the intensity that they do without realizing that that's increasing the risk of people getting sick, especially in the high contact sports. So I think the school with the waiver is trying to find a way that if something does happen, they want to cover their tracks so that the blame doesn't get put on them after the fact.
Exactly. And going off of your point, Gabby, what upsets me, especially as a former student athlete, is it feels like, to me, they're almost blackmailing their students into signing this waiver, with a sense of, okay, here's the risks, you acknowledge the risks, but if you don't play, we can also pull your scholarship. So of course, at that point, you're going to sign the waiver, because, you know, your choices are essentially either play at a high risk or lose your ability to go to school.
Exactly. And it's not fair.
It really isn't. And not only that, but Ohio State is one of the wealthiest athletic departments in the country and a huge leader within the NCAA. So what I'm concerned about is that if they go forward with this, are other schools and other universities going to follow in their footsteps? And what kind of domino effect is that going to have? Because that will put hundreds of thousands of student athletes, coaches, and communities as a whole at risk.
Exactly. And there's a lot of people that that this kind of involves, and it's even more, it expands beyond the athletics. So if an athlete goes, they play in a game, they come back fine, and say somehow along that road they contract the virus, then you're putting other people on campus at risk. You know what I mean? You're putting other people on campus at risk when you come back, and you're exposing yourself to other people in your school's community. So that's that at that point is expanding beyond the athletic department to the point where anybody on campus could get sick at that point, whether you're a faculty member or a student. And then at that point, would the school have to shut down and go back to online classes again like they were doing before, and then risk even more financial problems anyway after the fact? If we still have another wave of this in the fall, and the athletes are getting the virus and then bring it back to their campus, has the school even thought that far ahead yet or not?
Yeah, I think the other thing you got to think about is, will students even come back to certain campuses, or will just the regular students stay home while the athletes are on campus? Or could it be a little bit of both, where the students will be on campus, but they'll have to remain in their dorms and not be in mass gatherings like in a football stadium? Because remember, Ohio State, I would most likely assume that Ohio State, in terms of athletics, mostly survive through football. That's their big moneymaker right there. And I would assume number two would probably be basketball. Yep. So that's something you're going to have to think about in the months ahead. And right now the clock is ticking because most colleges begin their year in August. So we're just going to have to wait and see.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no easy solution, but I think they need to be more practical about it than they are, is my last thought that I would say.
Exactly. Well, thank you both again so much for participating in this discussion, and we look forward to another episode of the Weekly Pitch. I'm Sierra Keat. On behalf of everybody, I want to thank you all and wish you a good night.
Good night.
Good night.